Welcome everyone to the AMANI Project. I'm Nicole Inica Hamilton, and I've got to tell you, I've got a smile on my face. It is such a good day, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here with all of you and looking so forward to sitting down with our guest today. Let me tell you, Kagiso Lesego Molope is here with us in the house. Welcome. Kagiso, so lovely to have
Thank
you
you.
here with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and having me be part of the project. Thank you.
Well, it's a great pleasure. And I have to say, I was mentioning prior to the interview that clearly you and I understood the assignment because we are just bringing the silver and black fashion for today's
Silver glam.
the silver and black glam. Yes. And
Yeah.
so welcome again to the Amani Project. Such a pleasure again to sit down with you and to explore. You are, I have a list of words that I was thinking of prior to today's segment. Intriguing is
Ooh,
one of those words that I think of when I think of Kagiso.
thank you.
Um, I also thought of authentic when I was thinking about you. And I also thought about the word honest when I thought about you. And we're going to explore all of that because when I have looked back and through and listened and learned about who you are from human rights advocacy, counseling, filmmaking, all of them interlocked so beautifully, there is an honesty and intriguingness that just comes out. And so, hello. Hello, you. I'm excited to go through all of the above. But before we do, I'm so curious to know, as we definitely are going through very unique and very different times, how are you doing in this time and in this time of change in our global climate? How is Kagiso doing?
It's interesting that you say authentic and honest because I think these are the things that I have had to really hold on to through this time. It's been very difficult. And I've been in awe of artists who are able to work through it. I have found that it was very hard for me to work through it. I felt like, it feels like we're grieving. It feels like I'm grieving. I've been saying for a while we're grieving, something that we lost. We're grieving, and for me, when I say something that I've lost, I'm not talking about the old normal. I think I'm talking about the idea of being hopeful. Um, and so I wasn't feeling hopeful, and when I'm not feeling hopeful, I can't work. So my work wasn't feeling authentic. It was feeling like I was making myself, I was forcing myself to just get going, keep going, because I think there's been sort of this demand from a lot of us to just keep going and be hopeful, but I wasn't feeling those things. So I had to stop working for a while. I haven't been very busy during the pandemic, but then in the past, I would say 2 months, I've gone back into it. And I think I've only been able to get back into it because I admitted to my grief. I sat with it. I accepted that I wasn't feeling hopeful. And I just could only move forward with my true feelings about this time. And so now that I've managed to do that, I'm able to get back to work. And it's been a pleasure working
Mm.
from from an authentic place.
I think it's so special when, we can take that step to just say, you know what, I just have to move at my own pace.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I've found that it's an offering of self care for ourselves when we can do that pause.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very true. I'm someone who comes from people who are very in touch with the earth and people who are very in touch with um, our surroundings and what is happening, and away from clocks. What is the sun telling us? What is the moon telling us? What is what's happening with the heat? What's happening with the cold? That sort of thing, and I was thinking it's interesting that you should say it's an offering. I was thinking my work is an offering, right?
Mm.
My work is an offering to my people, to my ancestors. It's both a thank you and here you are, here's what I leave behind, sort of thing. And so I was thinking I'm able to make the offering now because I'm working from a more grounded place. I'm working from a more real place. I am saying, no, we're not able to go outside. We're not able to see people we love. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how does that translate into my work now? So yeah, it's been a very humbling time, I think, It's been but also at the same time, it's been a way of going back for me, which is a difficult thing to find. It's hard to find ways of going back, of returning to where you come from. When you're an immigrant and you're trying to be here, but you're part of there. So when I'm able to work, I'm able to connect with where I come from. I'm able to go back and then I'm more me. When I'm all of those things at once. I'm both an immigrant and a child of where I come from. When that kind of comes apart, when it's all fragmented, I'm not able to do anything. So in the end, or at least now, perhaps it's been sort of a blessing in disguise, this inability to work for a while. It's forced me to say, this isn't actually the place I usually work from. I'm not somebody who works from grief. I'm not somebody who works when she's hurt, because the pandemic has been hurtful for all of us, everybody in the world. So, I was saying to someone, I'd never be one of those jail writers. I'd never be one of those people who would churn out a novel in jail and people would say, wow, she wrote this when she was in prison. I could never be that person because grief is too debilitating for me. I need to feel a bit more whole, a bit more connected to all of my different selves to work. And so, yeah, in the end, I'm glad I waited. I'm glad I put down my work for a while and waited for a time when I could, work from a place that feels right. Yeah.
Do you feel like that pausing at times, putting down? I'll use your words. Do you feel like that putting down and also journeying through the grief has informed how you approach your creative practice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that I always say, you're always working, even when you're not sitting in front of a computer, when you're an artist, any artist, we're always at work. And I think the Kagiso who was trying very, very hard to produce something at the time I don't put her aside when I say I put down the work. I'm also working with her. I'm also working with that person who was unable to produce the big novel that she wanted to produce, that she started writing in 2020. And so, yeah, that putting down does inform how I move forward because I've learned so much from not doing it. I've learned so much from that part of myself that says I can't. You have to wait. You have to wait for me to be ready. I have this great poet friend who, I wrote to him about a year ago and I said, I don't understand. The characters are not coming. They're not communicating with me. I'm not getting there. I'm not producing anything. And he said, perhaps the characters don't need to be coaxed. Perhaps they also need to rest. Perhaps they need to come to a person who is feeling more grounded for them to fully, unveil themselves and their lives. And I think that's around the time I stopped and I said, oh yeah, I have to stop trying. I just have to let them be. And as I speak to you now, I'm going through this glorious time where I'm in such great communication with them. I'm in such, that it's just this kind of these spirits around me, letting me know, the stories of our people, the stories of the past. And it's been a very informative time. I've learned they don't come to you when you are not ready. So sit, rest. Perhaps I come from a people who need rest to move forward. historically we're hunter gatherers, the Sun people of Southern Africa, my people. So maybe I need to learn, before the hunt, there needs to be rest. It's kind of how I'm
Wow.
looking at it now, right? So that was it. The rest needed to happen, and now the hunt is here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I love the way that you said that because it does make me think about the work of our ancestors and what that means for us now. The fact that there's so much privilege
Mhm.
that we have now in comparison to what many of our ancestors did. And so talking about that rest, that resonates with me because I do think about, well, what did rest look like? And many times the lack thereof, for example, for our ancestors. What did that look like
Yeah.
for them?
I've been exploring that a lot. Not necessarily reading about it, but just thinking about what it looked like, around me. What were people doing? So, I was looking at, the Spanish tradition of the siesta and how, we only talk about Spain when we talk about, after mid afternoon rest. But I remember growing up that mid afternoon was too hot, which is sort of the same idea as, the south of Spain. It's too hot. You can't do anything when it's so hot. So I've been thinking a lot about that. What did my people do in the afternoons? Well, yeah, I remember we woke up very early, we got our chores done, and then in the afternoon, if you could, you rested. But of course, it's a time of capitalism. And you only really got to see that in elderly people who were not having to go to work every day, right? You didn't see it in younger people. But I think, I think about those elders who sat around trees, like under trees, and just calm down and rested in the afternoons. And I think this comes from somewhere. This is us, you know. I think now we think of rest as a kind of luxury, and I think that comes from living in a capitalist world. Is we're meant to think of rest as a sort of privilege, but I think it's a human need, and it's not some luxury that has to be earned necessarily. It's things, this is what our bodies need. And if the earth is at such a point that it's, all the elements are saying now you can't move on, then you listen to that and you take time off and you rest. And I think
Mm.
that's what the pandemic has done for me. I didn't look at it that way at first, but it's how I see it now.
And we deserve that rest.
Oh, of course, yeah,
We
absolutely.
do. We deserve that rest and deserve the opportunity to honor our bodies, our minds, and our spirits with
Mhm.
it when we so need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I heard you say at the Ottawa International Writers Festival that you write for yourself, and listening to you explore what that means and the authenticity as well. In what that means. One of the other things that I heard you say, which is so interesting, I want to go further, is that if you don't see the author in the books that you yourself read, that it doesn't feel authentic for you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, can we explore that word authentic? And if you can share more about the thought behind writing for yourself. And I'm going to preface that by saying that I think as an artist myself, one of the things that I find happens very often in conversations with other artists is that many times a lot of us can say that somewhere throughout our journey we have felt that we have to create art for other people. So we
Mhm.
have to create in a way that other people will like, write in a way that they will like, our audiences, rather than thinking about what story do I want to tell. We're writing and creating for other people to make sure that the reviewers like it, to make sure the audience likes it. And so hearing you say that you write for yourself was so profound in many ways because I've been in those conversations where so many of us at some point have felt we can't do that because there's a danger in writing for ourselves because what if others don't like it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate the I appreciate Nicole getting older and wiser and understanding that it's okay for me to create for
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
So can we explore that, please? The fact that you write for yourself. Can you explore that?
Well, I think the world we live in has all these maps, right? I was telling a friend, I said, I'm so fascinated by cartographers. And he was saying, well, why? Doesn't make any sense. I said, no, because they have so much power, right? They get to say, this is Canada, write it down. And so everybody who comes after that says, this is Canada. And then when you come and you say, well, actually, this was known as Turtle Island or something else, you come and you tell a different story, you're in danger of being called a liar. I'll tell you a little bit about that because I've written works where the editors have said, well, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound true. Well, they're saying that because they've been taught that there's something different on the map, that the map looks different. And I'm coming in and saying, no, it doesn't. But I think my father used to say, if you're not authentic, if you're not your real self, then you're cheating yourself. So if I come in and I go with the told story that was there to benefit someone else, right? Not to benefit my people from the place I write from, then I'm cheating myself and I'm cheating my people because I'm going with somebody else's story. So when I say I write for myself, I'm saying I'm writing to honor myself, my humanity, my people's humanity, because the story that's always been told about us is not the story we know. That's how I see it. So I say, change the map. Be brave enough to say, well, you know what? Actually, I'm not, in fact, changing the map. I'm saying actually something that's just been erased, but it was there to begin with.
Right.
So there's this kind of constant fight to say we were here too, or this is the story I know. Well, I'm an African woman, but I don't know Africa the way you know it. I know my Africa, and so I need to put that story out there, and that story is for me. And the other thing I like about it, and the way I like to think, the reason I like to think about it in terms of maps, is that the map has always said, we are not here. We don't exist. So when I say I'm writing for myself, I'm saying, I see myself and I want you to see me too. And yes, I do exist. And so when I leave, when I'm not here anymore, somebody who comes after me will see themselves on the map. Somebody who looks like me will see themselves on the map. Somebody who looks like me but doesn't have the same experiences I had will have probably, hopefully, the courage to put her own experience on the map, or that sort of thing. Um, so that yeah, I mean I don't know why, but it was a while. It's been a while that I've been thinking of us in terms of what the map looks like. And I remember
Mm.
listening to Sherry Dimerlin, um, the, the novelist, and she said about Indigenous people. She said the map is the story that leads us forward. So if people don't see themselves on the map, they don't know where we went, right? Because we're always looking for our people. We're always looking for ourselves. Where were we before? What did we do before? You and I were just talking about our ancestors and what were their habits? Did they rest? So if you think of stories as the map that informs people who come after us, then you can't lie, right? You don't even really have that choice. You have to be honest so that people don't get lost. I know maybe I make it sound too simplistic, but that's how my people's stories have helped me. It helped me not to get lost. help me not to believe I'm something that somebody else said I was, that I'm not. So that's where I come from when I say I write for myself, you know. Yeah.
I really think it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it also lends to something else that I've heard you say, which is that um, the importance of seeing the importance for African women to see themselves in the
Mhm.
art that they're consuming,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the power, the richness of that.
Yeah. And I think, for those of us, I didn't, but for people, I see this with children around me, for people who grow up in the diaspora, who don't know what it is, what it looks like, what it feels like to grow up around people who look like them, people who speak the language of their people. It's much more necessary. I think it's much more urgent for us artists to produce these images so that when they look in the mirror, they look in the mirror with pride because they see themselves in other places. Somebody else has said, I think this is beautiful. Somebody else has said, you exist. And so I really believe in that. I grew up in apartheid South Africa. I didn't read books by Black women. I didn't read a book by a Black woman until I was 18 and at university. And I remember really, it's almost as if you're becoming more real. It's almost as if you're seeing for the first time an image of yourself. It's almost as if it's that, and because it's that feeling of being mirrored for the first time, that feeling of, oh, yeah, recognition, familiarity. Yeah, I felt this too. Yeah, I know what it's like to have coils. When you read a book and up until then, the books I'd read were saying, when your hair flows in the wind and you don't know what that looks like, feels like, because your hair doesn't blow in the wind. It grows up and it's coily and it's thick and the wind doesn't move it. But then when you read in a book for the first time, someone saying, my hair, the coil in my hair, it's an incredible thing. It's so gorgeous. It's so powerful for your own growth and for your own sense of self. And I remember just really appreciating that, reading Alice Walcott, Toni Morrison, or, all of that for the first time and thinking, it's almost like, oh, I exist. I exist. Like,
Yes.
you existed the whole time. You just never saw yourself in the mirror, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I really think about how, as a young girl growing up in Burlington, Ontario, how often it was that I didn't see myself in a lot of the books that
Mhm.
we were being given in school. And so I recall those first moments of opening a book by Toni Morrison and reading through and thinking, wow, this person actually sounds like my mother, sounds like me. I could hear the richness of us in it. And so it makes you feel real,
Mhm.
like you do exist,
Mhm.
that you do have purpose, you do have a meaning on this earth. As a Black girl, I remember feeling that and feeling, okay, there's the pressure of feeling like I have to assimilate, the pressure of feeling like I have to be and look like everyone else started to slowly drift
Mhm.
lower and lower.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's exciting when that happens, I think, especially when you're growing up in a place where not a lot of people look like you. And that was my personal experience. And so I love that you said those words and those names, Toni Morrison. I mean, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm very curious. You mentioned your father. before. I'm curious now, how did you get started in the field? And what inspired you as well on the journey? I started to think about that inspiration as you began to mention your father. Was it your father? Were there others that inspired you? How did you get started?
Um, it's funny. I can tell you, I've been thinking about this a lot because what I'm writing now is, journeying back. And I've been thinking a lot about how I got started. I remember that watching Boys in the Hood, John Singleton, making the, American ghetto complex, making it not the picture that it, changing the map, changing the picture of what people had been thinking about Black people at the time. I remember watching that film and thinking, when we grew up under apartheid, there were no movies by Black people, obviously. So we were always watching martial arts movies. That's all that was allowed to be shown in the theaters in the township. But the first time I saw Boys in the Hood, I remember thinking, I I I know these people, but they're American. They speak a different language, but I know them. I know the chaotic neighborhood in which there is so much, intellectual, exchange, and where's there's some people I just grab. What I loved about it was just showing people grappling with regular human issues. And which I think is what he did, was he was humanizing his people in a way that theater hadn't done before. And I tend to get really inspired by theater. So I look back and I always think, yeah, when I watch Boys in the Hood, that's when I started thinking, I can do this. I can write this story. I can write these, I can write my people into existence. And then I think about it and I realized, I think this journey actually started when I was much younger because I was always anxious. I was such an anxious child. I had so much anxiety around me. And speaking of maps, I used to go to school. As a teenager, I went to school in town, and when you drove to town, there were signs that said, signs to Pretoria. When you drove back from town, there were no signs that said the name of my township. So it was, or we just going into the, and so I, as an anxious child, always had this feeling like it's almost like a lie that we say that the place where we live exists. There are no signs that say we go there. And I always, at my most anxious, almost felt like I was imagining that we were real, that the place was real.
Right.
I remember I would get more and more anxious until we were approaching it and I started seeing the houses. And then I would, calm down. But I didn't understand it this way. I mean, this is me looking back, understanding my anxiety. But I remember there were no signs. There were no signs. And I would look on the map and there were no signs. The township was not mentioned on the map. It was the city that was mentioned on the map. So I think my writing, comes from, it started in that place, and it started with me having these conversations with my father about, who we are as a people, with him telling me not to cheat myself, with me remembering my grandmother telling me this is where we used to live. My mother telling me we had a house over there. And when you looked over there, it was white people's houses. It was a white neighborhood. The neighborhood my mother spoke of didn't exist anymore because people were evacuated. People, it was razed to the ground, and new buildings came up, right? And so I think my writing goes back that far. It was me. I was always writing the story. I was always writing in my head the name of my township in my head. I was always, just writing us into existence. putting us on the maps when we weren't there. And so it's simpler, I think, for me when I'm talking now as an adult to say, I watched Boys in the Hood, and then I realized, I could write that story. Or the moment I knew I wanted to be a novelist was that I read Edwidge Danticat. I
Mm.
read The Farming of Bones.
Right.
I remember I worked in Toronto at the time, and I read The Farming of Bones, and I was on a train, a GO train from Toronto to Hamilton. Remember, I read that story. I got to my stop. I shut that book, and I said, "Oh, this is it. This is what I'm gonna be. I'm gonna be a novelist." And I think it could have been it couldn't have been any story. I want to say it could have been any story, but I don't think it could have been any story. I think it needed to be that story. I think it needed to be a Black woman's story. I think it was almost like my my needs were validated. Someone was saying, we need to say what happened. And that's what that book did for me. And so what I'm saying is there are moments. There are different moments where I knew that I wanted to be a writer. But when I really think about it, I think I was always writing from a very early age in my own way, even if I wasn't putting it on paper.
Mm. That's beautiful. I like the always, because for me, what I think about is that from the moment that you were born,
Hmm.
somewhere that seed was already there,
Hmm.
right? And it began to blossom. And even in that moment that you were on the train
Yeah.
and thinking about that revelation as well.
Yeah.
As yeah, it's I think it's quite special for us. We really can be in that moment and say, this is what I want to do. This is really what I want to do. And I know that I can do it well,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Because the stories are inside me already,
Yes.
And oh, this is the outlet. Oh, this is what to do with who I am, who I already am. What to do with who I already am, right? Figuring out that, oh, I already have the stories. Oh, I already have the knowledge. I just need to figure out where to put it. Because for a while I thought, well, maybe I want to be a filmmaker. But that moment, the importance of that moment for me was that, you know, just really kind of carving out a clear path. You want to be a novelist. You are a storyteller, but what kind of storyteller are you? And this is it. And that's just to emphasize my point that it took another Black woman for me to see myself as a novelist. It took another Black novelist. And growing up in the world we grow up in, it's extremely difficult for us to imagine ourselves in roles where we haven't seen people who look like us, right? We
Mm,
hear this
yeah.
all the time. We hear it in the corporate world. My sisters work in the corporate world. And there are two jobs. There's the job of knowing, figuring out what you want to do, and then the job of insisting that someone who looks like you can do it when you haven't seen examples of it, right? So I'm grateful for that book. I always will be. And I'm teaching creative writing now at Carleton University here in Ottawa, and one of the books that I have on my list is by Edwidge Danticat. I feel like she changed my life, and I always sort of hold her close, and hold her work close.
Beautiful. And shout out to everyone at Carleton. Hello, Carleton.
Hello.
Yeah, shout out to everyone at Carleton. I want to come back to something that you said about storytelling and the stories always being the stories. It's already inside of you.
Mm.
And when I think about that statement, what comes to mind for me is that there have been so many times that artists and again, I am one, and the idea of creating art And sometimes the roadblocks for some of us, we'll call it a roadblock. Some of us will call it writer's block. Some of us would just call it blocked.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, when we do have the story inside of us, where do we start? And so I'm saying that by prefacing my next question to you, which is how do we get started for those who want to write and want to do this work? How do we get started? Because sometimes what's in here is not always easy to put on a piece of paper, and structuring it and creating it in a way that we are pleased with, right? And so I want to take a step back and ask you, how did you prepare? What preparation did you take? What training? Give us the 411. How did you um, really, what was your undergoing of training in order to do this work?
Hmm. There are different sorts of training. I think um, I want to credit a teacher in high school who read a short story I'd written, and she said, "You could really be a writer," and nobody had ever said that to me.
Mm.
I want to
Wow.
credit her, but I think she's just one of the many, many people who created this path for me. So I feel incredibly lucky, and I feel the world, the universe. I don't know, my ancestors. I don't know who has been very generous to me because I grew up a child at the feet of storytellers. Um, I grew up amongst my people. I've just been so lucky. I grew up with my elders around me. Everybody in my neighborhood spoke my language, my mother tongue. Um, and the elders I spoke of earlier, the people who would sit under trees, the people who were retired, the people who were not under the pressure of having to get up and go and work, the women who had to get up and go work in the kitchens, the men who had to go and their whole job was to mow somebody's lawn for nothing, for very little money. They were in a place in their lives when they didn't have to do that anymore, and they spoke. I always feel so lucky that I had so much oral history at my fingertips. And so
Yes.
I would go. I always credit oral oral literature as the greatest thing that made me a writer. So I just went. I would go and sit at people's, under trees with elders. I would go and bring them a glass of water, and they would tell me about the time this happened to them, the time that happened to them, the time they fought in the war, that sort of thing. Um, the time before this, my great grandmother used to talk about the time before this. She would say, my great grandmother spoke fluent English, and people would say, "Oh my God, how does a woman in her 80s, a black woman in her 80s, speak fluent English?" And my great grandmother used to say, "There was a time before this. There was a time when your next door neighbor was a different color from you, and that was allowed." And so I absorbed that, and I absorbed that, and I absorbed that. And so, then the trick then for someone like me is to write it in a way that the world can read it because you've heard it so much, it's in your head. And I'm not a performer in any way. I'm a very quiet, sort of sit at my desk all the time sort of person. So I needed the stories to come out in a way that I could handle, in a way that the way that I'm built could handle. So I couldn't dance, and I used to be a dancer and stuff. I'm not saying I couldn't dance and that my body couldn't dance, but I couldn't. That just was not the outlet I could use to tell my stories. And so I want to say to people, you just read as much as possible in order to write because that's very inspiring and that is true. It has been good for me to read a lot. But the truth is, up until I was 14 years old, I didn't speak English. Um, Up until I was 18 years old, I didn't actually really write very much. Not really. And up until I guess around 15, 16, I couldn't have written in English this fluently because I wasn't thinking in English all the time. So it's been a very sort of complicated journey for someone like me. But I think, for everyone, yes, reading is very important. If you read other people's stories, if you hear other people's voices, then you can decide which is your own, right? Sometimes I read and I think this is gorgeous. This is not the kind of writer I am, but I appreciate it. And I always find that's the tricky thing. I didn't learn that until my third book, to separate other people's voices from my own. And, I'm not talking necessarily about pleasure. I'm not talking about plagiarism. I'm talking about separating what's expected of you from what you want for yourself. And so I was excited by, I've been excited by writers like Juno Diaz, who play with form and insert their own language into the English novel, the English story. And I mean, obviously, I was educated, by the English, literally people who grew up in England came to South Africa and were very invested in me writing English in the way that they considered proper and acceptable. And so it wasn't until around my third novel that I started moving away from what is proper, what is acceptable, what is the right form. So yeah, I don't know if that necessarily answers the question, but I think to write, you have to know yourself. And maybe we are going back to the beginning and talking about authenticity. Maybe we're going back to talking about honesty. You can't really write until you know yourself. And it was once I stopped feeling, maybe somewhat, I don't know if ashamed is the right word, but once I stopped feeling that the oral history I had didn't have a place in the English literature that I was trying to get a grasp of, once I stopped feeling that rich history that was given to me by the elders didn't have a place in moving forward with English literature. Once I stopped feeling that, once I embraced that as part of my own story, then I could write. So I think it's important to know yourself and who you are and who you come from, if you can, in order to be a really believable writer, for it to make sense. Because you're not vulnerable enough if you don't embrace who you are, if you only embrace literature the way that you're told literature should be, if you're only looking at writing, trying to look at, what Virginia Woolf was writing and the way she was writing. If you say this, I had a time I was told, oh, your writing is not literary, it's not literary fiction. And I sometimes think for Black writers, it's code for it's not proper enough. It's not sophisticated enough.
Right.
And once I got that code, you have to decode a lot. I think I always say, as people of African descent, we have to decode a lot of what's being said. Like go to university and they say we're trying to maintain standards. They used to say this a lot, when apartheid was falling. Yes, we want to accept everybody into the university, but we're trying to maintain standards. Yet once you decode that, you get what's been going on, then you can actually move forward.
Oh, the
So,
decoding.
oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, can we please make that the theme of our next interview, because there's a lot to
Oh yeah.
explore through decoding.
Oh yeah.
Yes, there
Yeah.
is. I have to say I'm imagining you sitting at the feet of those storytellers as you were saying that. I'm imagining that sitting under the trees
Yeah.
and listening to them. And I love to envision that the beautiful wrinkles in their faces, the possible beautiful wrinkles in their faces, the sound of their voices, the closing of their eyes as they're retelling. I'm thinking about those moments of sitting at the feet of even my grandmother as she fried fish in Trinidad, and listening to her talk about being a little girl and running through the streets and the excitement of going to school and putting on their uniforms, and just playing with their friends and telling stories of yesteryear.
Mhm.
So there is something very beautiful about sitting at the feet of
Yeah.
storytellers, sitting at the feet of our elders,
Yeah.
and just listening and receiving.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious. I'm so curious to know, in all of that listening and being at their feet, what I found, I will say this first, that in sitting at the feet of so many wonderful elders and storytellers, that a lot of times in my journey, many of them have become collaborators for me. And so, has this been the case for you? Have any of those individuals, have you considered them to be collaborators? Have they become your collaborators? What has that looked like for you, those storytellers that you've sat at the feet of?
Yeah. I think that's such an important question, actually. I'm really touched by that. Um, Partly because I've been thinking on it a lot. Because I'm so far away from them now, right? I'm so far from home, from the home I be where the home where I began. This, Canada's my other home now. Um, I read something, Catherine Hernandez, the Canadian writer. She said, you know, writing is really a form of mediumship. And I agree with that. And I think that is a form of collaboration. I think of my people, the ones I know and the ones I didn't know, my ancestors, my elders. I think of them absolutely as people who collaborate with me in my work every day. I wrote a story yesterday about my grandmother, and she was, I felt she was here with me the whole time. And what I was talking about at the beginning, opening myself up to stories. That's what I was doing yesterday when I was writing about my grandmother. I just sat there and just let me remember her, and felt that she was telling me the story of us, because it was the story of us. It wasn't her, it wasn't me, it was us. It was our love and our time spent together. And as the time, like, I couldn't remember in moments. I thought, I don't really know. And then I just, sat still and just let her guide me through it. Let me remember her. And so that is collaboration for me. That is one thing, as I said before, that's one thing that the pandemic has done for me. Let yourself listen. And I didn't have that before.
Mm,
I think I raced through a lot of stories, and I didn't sit with not knowing. It's hard when you want to produce work, when you want, those are such capital terms too, producing. But when you want to make an offering, it's hard. When you want to see your work out in the world, it's hard not to race through it. It's hard not to just churn out whatever you think is expected of you. And that's what that's what the pandemic has taught me. This inability to write has just taught me to sit and say, I don't know. And that's one thing that I remember from the elders. I don't know. It's,
mm,
I think people think of elders as they are these great sources of knowledge, right? They are informers of the past. They are that, they're knowledge keepers, of course. One big thing that I think people don't talk about a lot is that elders also say, well, we don't know. And that's okay.
Yes.
We don't know if, the way the sky looks now tells us that that there'll be rain, but we don't know. What
Mm.
we're gonna do is we have to sit and wait. And the sitting and waiting is what I was grappling with at the beginning of the pandemic. I didn't want to sit, I didn't want to wait. And I remember I was asked to write a piece about what I think the world would look like post COVID. And I ended up writing that. I ended up writing that I remember the elders sitting under trees waiting for the sky to decide what it was going to do, and for for the weather to decide which way it was going to go, and we just had to wait and see. And so I've become that kind of writer now. That's a new thing for me.
Mm.
Wait and find out. I'm letting myself wait and
Yeah.
find out.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I love that you said the not knowing. I remember the first time that my mother said, I actually don't know the answer to that question, Nicole. It was like a shocker moment for me because in one respect you expect as kids for our elders to know everything, the answer to everything.
Yeah.
But it also did something very special for me because I realized, oh, wait a second, if mom doesn't know, that makes it okay for the times that I don't know either. So I really enjoyed the fact that you shared that it's okay to not know. We are consistently changing and growing and shifting and moving through a world that is shifting and changing and growing. And so there are going to be moments where we just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
And in that not knowing, have there ever been times that you've encountered roadblocks, like writer's block, perhaps? Have you ever encountered that? And if so, how did you climb over those mountains? How did you conquer them?
Mm. And I think that's the thing that I'm saying about the pandemic is that in the past I would have just called it a writer's block, and then I would have just read a lot more, and then I would have just been inspired from the reading. I would have waited a little bit longer and then just gone ahead and written. I don't see the blocks that way anymore because I've discovered that sort of surrendering to not knowing is the path, towards, is the way out of the block. So I used to say in the past, I really don't believe in writer's block, but I don't know. I didn't mean that I didn't get stuck. I did get stuck. But I believe that it's in accepting that you're stuck that the information comes. And because I work with these characters who guide and lead, and I'm not, some writers are like this, some are not. Sometimes, writers will say, well, I don't want my character to do this, so I want to change what he's doing. And I've had times when I've been a little bit envious of that. Whoa, you can tell me what to do. You're in charge. You have authority.
Right.
It doesn't work that way for me, It's not happening, it's not happening. So I think that's what I've learned for myself now is to say I don't know. It's to say I actually don't know where the story is going. And like I was saying, I was doing with my grandmother yesterday. In the past, I would have said, I'm having a block. I'm stuck. I can't write anymore about my grandmother because I just don't remember her. And that's the block, right? That's what we call writer's block. I just have this kind of stuck thing happening. But I just sat with it and I said, I don't remember, which is the same as I don't know. I don't know where this is going. And then I just sat back and I thought, maybe you can tell me what was going on at that time. Maybe you can talk to me. And just sat like that for a while. And perhaps that was my way of allowing myself to slow down my thoughts, to go back in a more authentic way, like a more honest way, and say, "Well, I don't really know what's going on," and allowing the past to come back to me more slowly, you know. So yeah, I don't think a writer's block doesn't exist. I think it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to remind you that you're not in control, surrender to not knowing, surrender to not remembering, and then maybe, then it'll come to you. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I felt that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so I have so many themes in my head for future conversations with you, but because we are wrapping, and I have to say, you've made my day. I want to share with our audience listening a fun fact about you. Something that actually made me very happy. And I thought to myself, okay, now we are best friends. The fact that you plan to spend your later years writing every day and eating only potato chips and dip. Let me tell you something. That's the life right there. Oh, I loved that when I read that. So, yes, fun fact about you, you are a potato chip eating
I
individual.
am. And even when I'm going through moments of thinking, okay, well, maybe I need to watch my weight, or maybe I need to eat healthy, or maybe whatever. Even when I'm going through that, I say there's too much pleasure in eating potato chips to cut them out of my diet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I do love that. I do. As we wrap up potato chips and all, any last words for aspiring artists, writers?
Mm.
Any last words for them?
Um, I would say let yourself not know, and open yourself up to the possibilities that come with that, come with being in that space. Um, it's important, I think, to ask yourself why. Why am I doing this? Why do I want to be a writer? Do I just want to get published? Why? Why is such an important question? Because why also frees you up to do this in exactly the way that you choose. Um, I quote this all the time, but I think it was Native American writer Daniel Justice Heath. He said, "We need to learn to become good ancestors." For me personally, I'm not saying this is everybody's journey, but for myself, I think when I say why am I doing this? When I get stuck and I say, I don't know why I'm doing this, I remember that we need to learn to become good ancestors. And I know that, language is powerful, and language stays. And what I write now will be around for people who come after me. And in that way, perhaps, I hope I'm working towards becoming a good ancestor. Yeah.
Wow, you are joy. Let me tell you, you are joy. Thank you so much. I want to thank you for joining me today on the Amani Project. It's been such a pleasure to
Thank you
sit
so
down with you. You are joy, and I look so forward to having more conversations with you in future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Next time we'll do it over potato chips and dip.
That's it right there. I am ready for the potato chips and dip. I will bring it.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Three different flavors at
yeah.
least, right?
Of course.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
My
Bye.
pleasure. Thank you. Oh, what a pleasure to sit down with Kagiso Lesego Molope. My day has been made. I hope yours has been too. I don't see why it wouldn't have been. I received so much from that conversation, so much. And so thank you for joining all of us here today on the Amani Project. Stay with us. We've got so many more wonderful conversations, artist talks coming up. I'm Nicole Inica Hamilton. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.